Wyatt Claypool, if you heard that question, you want to take that?
Well, yeah, I think that Canada would react far differently to the situation if we had experience with a separatist terrorist group basically taking root in India. If the FLQ, the separatist Quebec terrorist group, was holed up in India, planning attacks, training people, and then trying to send them back to Canada, we would obviously have a major problem with it. And it's absolutely correct to say that there's been a lot of cherry picking going on. We've been having CCP police stations on Canadian soil harassing Chinese diaspora who do not like Beijing, because they do not like the CCP government. They are being harassed and intimidated and sometimes attacked. We had Karima Baloch, the Balochistani activist, getting drowned in Toronto, which was labeled a suicide. We didn't even investigate, even though it made no sense that she would drown herself at 2 a.m. in Toronto. And that there was a lot of, we've had other cases, Iranian regime, anti-regime activists in Iran getting murdered in Canada. And we just don't do anything about it. But I think because Justin Trudeau wanted a political fight that he thought would maybe bolster his popularity, he ended up going off on a limb with this fight with India. And it's 100% true that, yeah, there could be evidence of an extrajudicial killing. We'd love to see it. But the problem is that you don't go off on a limb and make the accusation before you have the evidence. Right now, it's kind of embarrassing to Canada. Even if we hypothetically come up with the evidence, we're just going to seem like just a country that's hard to trust. That when Canada starts speaking, you have to wait a few weeks before you actually figure out what they're saying has any substance to it.
Okay. Can I go back to Peter MacKay before I go back to the others? On the point that Wyatt Claypool made, and I think it's a fair point, a lot of commentators have been talking about this in Canada as well. Before the last election, Justin Trudeau went all fire and brimstone against China and Chinese meddling in Canadian politics, interference in Canadian elections, etc. But ever since that whole Meng Wanzhou case, which was the daughter of the Huawei founder, and she was released in exchange for 2 Canadian nationals, he's been accused of going soft on China. A lot of Canadian commentators are asking if this whole brouhaha around Khalistan and making these public allegations against India is a convenient diversionary tactic from the accusation against Trudeau that he's gone soft on China.
Well, one would certainly hope not, given the stakes. And, at this point, 8 years as Prime Minister, one would hope that he has come to understand the importance of his role and everything that he says diplomatically. I wouldn't put this down to malice as much as I would to incompetence. We saw something happen yesterday in the House of Commons when the Ukrainian president was visiting, and we had a former Nazi participant, albeit a Ukrainian, who fought against the Russians in the gallery that was recognized. We cannot forget as well the serious incident of the Air India bombing that happened, that originated from Canada. And so one would hope the Prime Minister has a much firmer grasp of history, let alone reality, and not just trying to change the channel here. I still come back to the rule of law argument, which is certainly we cannot have foreign interference to the degree where an individual who does have certainly a spotty record, one would note, in terms of his immigration to Canada, but he does hold a Canadian passport. How that came about is still a bit of a question, but nevertheless, he is entitled to the protection of the rule of law, and the police should be investigating this fully. The political part of this is what does not make sense, and we are going to have in our country a sitting judge, examine the issue of foreign interference, and this has now expanded more broadly because it was almost solely focused on China. This is now obviously going to entail looking at the circumstances of what has happened here with the assassination of Mr. Nijjar. But was this an attempt to change the channel? I can't imagine that any sitting prime minister in a G7 country, in a Commonwealth country, a rule of law country, would sink to such depths. I hope that is not true.
Okay, so let me go to Raymond Vickery, and I want to go across to our wall here. I hope you can hear me fine, Mr. Vickery. Over the weekend, one of the things that came out was, and this was a New York Times report, and David Cohen, who is the U.S. ambassador to Canada, alluded to this, that the initial intel on this came from the United States as part of the Five Eyes Alliance. Does that materially change anything? Because so far, all U.S. officials have spoken on record on this, whether it was Blinken or Jake Sullivan or even the White House spokesperson earlier this morning, was basically saying that, look, we want India to cooperate. Both our partnerships are strong. We care deeply for both countries. But at the end of the day, no U.S. official has come forth and said, or we condemn this, or we believe Mr. Trudeau's allegations, or that, India should not be doing this, should not be going around in foreign locations killing foreign nationals. They've taken a very, very safe and very conservative line on these allegations by Mr. Trudeau. Raymond Vickery.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I believe that the main point here is how can the U.S. and India work together to build peace and prosperity in the world. And that involves being able to fight terrorism from wherever it originates. That having been said, it is absolutely plain that there has to be a distinction between actions taken and words which are said. Evidently, this fellow was doing more than talking about a separate state in India. He was taking some action. And so therefore, there has to be something that will correct that situation. But it is not appropriate, in order to be able to do that, to simply enter the territory of someone else and kill them. It never has been that two wrongs make a right. Mm-hmm. And what the United States and India need to do is to work together to be able to fight terrorism, whether or not it's originating from Canada or Pakistan or wherever. And I believe that to be the case, but it also is incumbent upon India, who says that India has not been involved in this, that's absurd, not to turn around and say, well, if we did do it, it's all right because somebody else did it. That isn't the way to build an international system which meets the standards which India and the United States have set for it. And I hope that would not be the case here.
Okay, Vivek Tejia, and I want to go to the Washington Post investigation. For a person who had police protection, Nijjar had police protection before he was killed, why would the police take 20 minutes to reach the crime scene? And then these jurisdictional issues, you'd imagine that it happens in third world countries, but the local police and the federal police were fighting over, whose jurisdiction this comes under. That again further delayed. And 3 months on, the fact that none of the surrounding, premises, whether it's residential or commercial, they've not been asked for CCTV footage. None of those folks have been interviewed. It's such a high profile case. Doesn't the investigation 3 months on look a bit amateurish?
Well, again, I am a foreign policy expert, not an expert on police procedures in Canada. But so all I can say is it certainly sounds strange. It doesn't look like they've handled the investigation terribly well. Going on this reportage, again, I cannot speak to the truth of what was stated in the post. So
case for which the Prime Minister has gone public with these allegations. You'd imagine that it's a slightly more watertight case for him to have gone public with these allegations.
Now, that I can speak to, and I would really echo what has been said on this panel, that his way of handling this has been extremely problematic. If indeed he has credible evidence, or as he calls it, then that has to be handled diplomatically through allies, speaking to India through back channels, not shouted from the rooftops, because now that has thrown a huge spanner in the works. There's a tailspin now. India stopped visas. So what's next? So I think it's been handled very, very poorly. And really, unless he had a smoking gun, he would not have done this in Parliament. But yet, where is the smoking gun? All we have had are leaked reports in various media houses, presumably leaked by Canada, that there's human intel or signals intel, but we haven't seen it. So I find that really, really very bizarre.